The plane's engines roared, a deafening pulse that seemed to shake the very air, but for Daniel Harper, the sound was drowned out by the frantic beat of his heart. He stood at the gate, clutching his daughter's tiny hand, her pink backpack slung over his shoulder, its frayed straps a testament to their hard-won journey. The boarding agent's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the final call for Flight 237 to Seattle, and Daniel's stomach churned as he realized there was only one seat left, and it was his last chance to get to the hospital where his son lay fighting for his life. He glanced down at Lily, her wide, trusting eyes oblivious to the weight of the moment, and felt the familiar sting of desperation claw at his chest. He was a single father, stretched thin by grief and responsibility, and now the universe seemed to conspire against him, dangling hope just out of reach. The crowd surged forward, impatient travelers jostling for position, and Daniel tightened his grip on Lily's hand, praying for a miracle he wasn't sure he deserved. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the power of humanity to shine through even the darkest moments, please hit that like button, leave a comment, share this story, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks, because this is a story about the moments that remind us why we keep fighting. Daniel's life hadn't always been this precarious. 3 years ago, he'd been a man with a plan, a steady job as a mechanic, a modest but cozy home in Boise, and a family that filled his world with light. His wife, Sarah, had been the heart of it all, her laughter a melody that could soothe even the worst of days. Their son, Ethan, was 8 then, a whirlwind of energy with a passion for soccer and a knack for asking questions that made Daniel rethink the world. Lily, barely 3, was their quiet dreamer, always trailing behind her brother with a stuffed bunny in tow. But then came the night that shattered everything. A drunk driver, a rain-slicked road, and a phone call that left Daniel sobbing on the kitchen floor. Sarah was gone, and Ethan was left with injuries that would change him forever. The doctors spoke of spinal damage, of months in rehabilitation, of a life where running might never come easily again. Daniel had held Lily close that night, her tiny body trembling as she asked why Mommy wasn't coming home, and he'd had no answers, only tears. From that moment, he'd become both mother and father, piecing together a life for his children while carrying a grief so heavy it threatened to bury him. The years that followed were a blur of struggle. Daniel took on extra shifts at the garage, his hands stained with grease and his back aching from long hours, but the medical bills piled higher than he could climb. Ethan's treatments were relentless. Surgeries, physical therapy, experimental procedures that offered glimmers of hope but drained their savings. Lily, now 6, had learned to be independent far too young, coloring quietly in the corner of hospital waiting rooms while Daniel held Ethan's hand through another round of tests. The move to Seattle was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to be closer to a specialist who believed Ethan could regain more mobility with a cutting-edge procedure. Daniel had sold nearly everything they owned to afford the deposit on a small apartment and the plane tickets, but even that wasn't enough. When he'd arrived at the airport that morning, he discovered a glitch in their booking. Only one seat had been reserved, not 2. The agent had apologized, her eyes sympathetic but firm. The flight was overbooked, and there was nothing she could do unless someone gave up their seat. Daniel had pleaded, his voice cracking as he explained about Ethan, about the hospital, about the surgery scheduled for tomorrow. But the other passengers avoided his gaze, their own plans and urgency outweighing his desperation. Lily clung to his leg, sensing his panic, and Daniel felt the world closing in, a suffocating reminder of how often he'd failed to protect the ones he loved. The boarding line dwindled, and Daniel's hope faded with it. He stood frozen, the weight of Lily's backpack pulling at his shoulder, his mind racing for solutions that didn't exist. He couldn't afford another flight, not with the hospital bills looming, and driving would take too long. Ethan's surgery couldn't wait. The agent called his name, her tone softer now, and handed him a single boarding pass. "It's the last seat in economy," she said, glancing at Lily. "I'm so sorry, sir, but we can't let her board without a ticket." Daniel nodded numbly, his throat tight, and turned to Lily, crouching to meet her eyes. "We'll figure this out, okay, sweetheart?" he whispered, though he didn't believe it himself. She nodded, her trust in him unshaken, and it broke his heart all over again. He took her hand and stepped toward the gate, his mind a storm of fear and guilt, when a voice cut through the chaos, a voice from the front of the plane, sharp and commanding. "Bring him." Daniel looked up, startled, and saw a woman standing in the doorway of the jetway, her posture radiating authority. She was dressed in a tailored blazer, her hair swept into an elegant updo, and her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made the crowd part. "The man with the little girl," she said, louder now, addressing the agent. "Bring him to first class." The moment hung suspended, the murmurs of the other passengers fading into a distant hum. Daniel's breath caught as the agent hesitated, then motioned for him to follow. He scooped Lily into his arms, her small body warm against his chest, and hurried forward, unsure if this was a dream or a trick. The woman stepped aside as he approached, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "You're going to Seattle for your son, aren't you?" she said, her voice quieter now, almost gentle. Daniel nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, and she gestured toward the first-class cabin. "Take my seat, both of you." The words didn't register at first, their weight too immense to process. He stammered a protest. Surely she didn't mean it, surely there was a catch, but she shook her head, a faint smile breaking through her composed exterior. "I've been where you are," she said simply. "Go." The agent, now flustered, guided Daniel and Lily into the plush, spacious cabin, where leather seats and soft lighting felt like another world. Daniel sank into the seat, Lily perched on his lap, and for the first time in hours, he exhaled. The woman disappeared into the economy section, her figure swallowed by the crowd, and Daniel was left with a mix of gratitude and disbelief, his heart pounding with the realization that a stranger had just changed everything. As the plane taxied down the runway, Daniel's mind replayed the moment, searching for an explanation. Who was she? Why had she done it? Lily, oblivious to the magnitude of the gesture, fiddled with the armrest, her small fingers tracing the buttons that adjusted the seat. Daniel pulled her close, kissing the top of her head, and tried to focus on the present. The flight was only a few hours, but it felt like a lifeline, a bridge to Ethan and the hope of a better future. Yet even in this moment of relief, doubt gnawed at him. What if the surgery didn't work? What if he couldn't provide for his children the way they deserved? The guilt of surviving when Sarah hadn't, of being the one left to carry their family forward, was a constant shadow. He glanced out the window, the clouds stretching endlessly below, and felt the weight of his responsibilities settle deeper. But there was something else now, too, a spark of hope, kindled by a stranger's kindness, that maybe he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. In Seattle, the hospital was a maze of white corridors and antiseptic smells, but Ethan's smile when he saw them made it all fade away. He was thinner than Daniel remembered, his 13-year-old frame fragile beneath the hospital gown, but his eyes lit up with the same fire that had always defined him. "You made it," Ethan said, his voice weak but warm, and Daniel felt tears prick his eyes as he hugged his son, careful not to disturb the IV lines. Lily clambered onto the bed, chattering about the plane and the fancy seats, and for a moment, they were just a family again, not defined by loss or struggle. The surgeon came by later, explaining the procedure with cautious optimism. It could improve Ethan's mobility, maybe even let him walk without a brace someday, but there were risks, and recovery would be long. Daniel listened, nodding, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder, and made a silent vow to be enough for both his children, no matter what came next. The surgery was scheduled for early the next morning, and Daniel spent the night in a chair by Ethan's bed, Lily curled up on a cot nearby. He didn't sleep, his mind too full of memories and fears. He thought of Sarah, of the way she'd always known how to make Ethan laugh, and wished she could see them now, see how hard they were fighting. He thought of the woman on the plane, her quiet resolve, and wondered what had driven her to give up her seat. Had she lost someone, too? Had she faced her own impossible choices? The questions lingered, unanswered, but they fueled a determination in him to pay her kindness forward, to be the kind of person who could make a difference, even in a small way. The surgery went better than expected. Ethan came through with a strength that left the doctors cautiously hopeful, and though the road to recovery would be long, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Days turned into weeks, and the hospital became a second home. Lily started school in Seattle, her resilience a quiet miracle, and Daniel found a job at a local garage, the familiar rhythm of work grounding him. But the memory of the woman on the plane stayed with him, a reminder that kindness could change a life in an instant. He never learned her name, never had the chance to thank her, but he carried her gesture like a talisman, a proof that hope could find a way even in the darkest moments. One evening, months later, Daniel sat with Ethan and Lily in their small apartment, the Seattle skyline glowing faintly through the window. Ethan was practicing with his crutches, determined to take a few steps without help, and Lily was cheering him on, her laughter filling the room. Daniel watched them, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. They were still healing, still finding their way, but they were together, and that was enough. He thought back to the plane, to the moment when a stranger's voice had cut through his despair, and felt a surge of emotion. If this story of struggle, kindness, and hope has touched your heart, please like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Kindness Speaks to join us in celebrating the moments that remind us of the good in the world. And before we end, a special request: drop a comment below with a moment of kindness you've witnessed or experienced. It might just inspire someone else to keep going.